We're about to begin a brand new love journey. The night rain fell steadily, like the weary breathing of the city. Neon lights shimmered across the slick pavement, casting faint lilac hues on the fogged windows of Moonlight Cafe, a small corner shop where Emily Walker worked the night shift 3 evenings a week. It was close to 11. The last customer had just left, leaving behind a half-finished cup of coffee and a lingering trace of vanilla in the air. Emily sighed, rolled up her sleeves, and began cleaning the tables. Rainy nights always made her feel lonely. Not the kind that came with tears, but the quiet kind, like the ticking of a clock in an empty room. She was a senior majoring in business administration, still short nearly $3,000 for this semester's tuition. Rent, electricity, and her mother's old hospital bills were piling up in the drawer at home. Everything felt like trying to swim through icy water, just keeping her head above the surface to breathe. When she bent down to pick up a napkin that had fallen near the window, she noticed something half hidden in the light. A black leather wallet, finely stitched, so soft that the mere touch of it told her it was expensive. She opened it. Inside was a thick stack of crisp $100 bills, at least $10,000, maybe more. Tucked neatly beside it was a silver-edged business card embossed with an elegant logo, Alexander Grant, Chief Executive Officer, Grant Corporation. Emily froze. She knew that name. One of the most powerful men in the city, the youngest CEO in the history of Grant Corporation, a real estate empire that owned the kind of buildings ordinary people could only look up at. Her fingers tightened around the wallet. Her heart raced. $10,000. Enough to pay her tuition and 6 months' rent. It was enough to let her quit working until 3 in the morning. Enough for her mother to finally go to the hospital without worrying about the cost. For a few seconds, the temptation felt so close. She sat down, hands trembling slightly as she stared at the bills. The faces of her stern landlord, the overdue notices, and the reminder that her tuition payment was due Monday all flashed through her mind. But then, she exhaled softly. A tired yet peaceful smile appeared on her lips. If it isn't mine, I shouldn't keep it. She took out the business card and dialed the number printed on it. The phone rang 3 times before a deep, cool voice answered. Alexander Grant. Emily swallowed, trying to steady her tone. Good evening. I'm a waitress at Moonlight Cafe. I believe I found your wallet. Silence. Then the man's voice came again, dry, curt, and utterly disinterested. Are you sure? Yes, it has your card, your bank. You don't have to bother. If you want to keep it, keep it. The words cut through her like a blade. Before she could say another word, the line went dead. Emily sat there motionless, phone still in her hand. Keep it, she murmured, a faint, incredulous smile tugging at her lips. Rich people are really something else. But the smile didn't last long. She looked back at the wallet, the light glinting off her clear brown eyes, and she knew she couldn't do it. 30 minutes later, Emily stood under the rain-soaked awning, her umbrella bending against the wind, her coat drenched. Still, she decided to take the wallet directly to Grant Corporation, the skyscraper whose lights never seemed to go out. The security guard eyed her with mild suspicion. You're saying you found Mr. Grant's wallet? Yes, I just want to return it to him personally. After a phone call to confirm, the guard nodded reluctantly. 42nd floor. But he doesn't like being disturbed. You'd better be prepared. The elevator hummed as it rose. For a brief moment, Emily caught her reflection in the mirrored wall. Old coat, wet shoes, messy hair. She looked out of place in this world of glass and gold. Yet inside, her heart was calm. When the doors slid open, the view took her breath away. A wide office bathed in warm golden light, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the rain-drenched city. A man stood with his back to her, tall and straight, a glass of wine in his hand. Just leave it on the desk, he said evenly, without turning. Emily walked forward and placed the wallet carefully on the glass table. Her voice was soft but firm. I just wanted to make sure it reached you safely. This time he turned around. The face that met her was striking. Sharp lines, calm strength, and eyes the color of polished steel. He looked at her for a long moment, as if searching for something behind her calm expression. What's your name? Emily Walker. He opened the wallet, glanced through it, and nodded slightly. Nothing's missing. Of course not, she replied, smiling faintly. He looked up, meeting her gaze properly for the first time. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe confusion. Perhaps he wasn't used to people doing the right thing for no reason. I told you it wasn't necessary to trouble yourself. I know, she said, but if I'd kept it, I don't think I could have slept tonight. A gust of wind brushed against the windows, carrying the sound of rain. He stood still, watching the young woman before him. Drenched coat, cheap umbrella, but eyes bright and honest. Voice so genuine it left no room for doubt. Do you realize you just broke the first rule of this world? He asked quietly. What rule is that? Never trust a stranger? She laughed softly, tilting her head. Then maybe you should meet a few more strangers? He said nothing. And for reasons he couldn't explain, in that quiet moment, Alexander Grant, the man the city feared, felt something gentle stirring inside him. Emily turned to leave, her footsteps clicking lightly across the polished floor. The door closed behind her. Outside, the rain kept falling. But inside the glass walls of Alexander's office, something had shifted, small and fragile, like the flicker of a flame in the cold night. In the office on the 42nd floor, dim light reflected off the glass walls, casting Alexander Grant's face in shades of fatigue and silence. Late at night, the city below sparkled like a field of scattered stars. But to him, those lights were nothing more than hollow squares of gold. He leaned back in his chair, loosening his tie, absent-mindedly twirling a silver pen between his fingers. On the desk lay a pile of unsigned contracts, a list of potential partners, and a phone blinking with dozens of unread messages. His world was always noisy, but in a strangely empty way. In the past few years, Alexander had learned a brutal truth about the elite. Everything had a price, even loyalty. He had once trusted his older brother, co-founder of Grant Corporation, until he discovered the man had been embezzling funds for secret investments. He had once trusted his best friend, until that friend used confidential information to sabotage him in an international deal. Even those he paid the most, who spoke of loyalty with rehearsed devotion, were only waiting for their chance to betray him. And so Alexander built a wall around himself, thick, cold, and unyielding as steel. One day during a signing meeting, he had turned to his assistant and muttered almost to himself, "You know, I don't think I can trust anyone anymore." The assistant chuckled, half joking, half serious. "Maybe you should test that. Leave your wallet somewhere. See who calls you back." The idea began as nothing but a careless remark, but that night he actually did it. He left his wallet on the chair of a small cafe, the one he often visited alone at the end of long days, to escape the boardrooms and the artificial smiles. He wanted to see if there was anyone left in the world who wouldn't be blinded by money. He didn't expect that this tiny experiment would become a turning point in his life. The phone had rung that very evening. A soft, female voice came through, nervous, trembling slightly, but clear. "Good evening. I'm a waitress at Moonlight Cafe. I think I found your wallet." Alexander remembered that moment vividly. The first thing he felt was suspicion. Numbers flashed instantly through his mind. $10,000 in cash, 5 credit cards, and a business card with his name printed on it. "You don't have to bother. If you want to keep it," he had said flatly, out of sheer instinct. Because he didn't believe. He didn't believe anyone could touch his money and still have clean hands. But that girl had done what no one else would. She had come all the way to his headquarters in the pouring rain, drenched from head to toe, just to return something that wasn't hers. No pleading, no pretense, no hidden agenda. Simply because it was the right thing to do. Since that night, Alexander hadn't been able to forget those eyes. Clear, honest, utterly different from every gaze he'd ever known. A poor girl working night shifts with calloused hands and a gentle voice that brushed against his thoughts like wind. And somehow she had unsettled him more than any deal he had ever made. 3 days later, Alexander drove to Moonlight Cafe. He wore dark glasses, a charcoal coat, and chose a corner seat near the window where shadows gathered. She was there. Her hair was tied up, her white shirt slightly worn, with a faint coffee stain on her sleeve. She wiped tables with practiced ease. Every time a customer walked in, she offered a small, genuine smile. Not rehearsed, not polite, just sincere. He ordered in a low voice, hoping she wouldn't recognize him. "One espresso, no sugar, extra hot water." "Right away, sir." She smiled again before turning away. Alexander watched her go, and for reasons he couldn't explain, his heartbeat stumbled. He observed her serve an elderly customer, pick up a napkin that had fallen, then crouch down to help a little boy retrieve his dropped pastry. She tore the remaining piece in half and handed it back. "Half for you, half for your mom. She's been waiting so patiently." The mother smiled in gratitude, and Alexander, the man used to sharp negotiations and glittering parties, felt his throat tighten over something so simple. A woman wiping tables, a child's laughter, and he, a man surrounded by excess, suddenly felt hollow. He stayed until closing time. When Emily turned off the lights, he was still there. She glanced over, seeing only a quiet man in the corner, staring out at the rain. "Sir, we're closing soon," she said softly. He looked up and their eyes met, his silver-gray gaze locking with her warm brown one. For a moment, neither spoke. She didn't recognize him, the man whose wallet she had returned days ago, and he didn't reveal it. "Thank you for the coffee," he said quietly. "Thank you for stopping by." She smiled, her voice so gentle it felt like a melody. When he stepped outside, the night wind carried the scent of coffee and pastries. Standing beneath the awning, watching the fine drizzle shimmer under the streetlight, Alexander found himself smiling. He no longer thought of it as a test, because what he had received wasn't just his wallet back. It was something he thought he'd lost forever: faith in human goodness. That night back home, he picked up his phone and looked at the business card she had returned with the wallet. On the back, written in neat, looping handwriting, were the words, "Returning it because it isn't mine. Have a good night, Emily Walker." For the first time in years, Alexander Grant slept peacefully. A week passed, yet the image of that girl still lingered in Alexander's mind. The clear eyes, the quiet but resolute voice, the trembling hands placing the wallet on his desk as if afraid to stain his world. No matter how many meetings, contracts, or lavish parties filled his schedule, that single moment replayed again and again. One question kept echoing in his head. How could someone with so little choose honesty when those with everything choose deceit? That night, he didn't drive straight home. Instead of heading to his Hudson River penthouse, Alexander sat in his car beneath the streetlight, his expression unreadable. A faint jazz tune played on the radio, but he wasn't listening. Something inside him had shifted, something small but real. The next morning, he gave his assistant, Lucas, a quiet order. "I want to know everything about Emily Walker. Moonlight Cafe, as soon as possible." Lucas blinked, surprised. "She's the woman who returned my wallet." That was all he said, and that was enough. Those who had worked long enough at Grant Corporation knew that when Alexander Grant asked about someone, the only proper response was silence and speed. 3 days later, the report lay neatly on his desk, organized, detailed, complete. Name: Emily Walker, age 22. Status: senior student at Newfield University, majoring in business administration. Income: part-time waitress. Moonlight Cafe, night shift. Outstanding tuition: $2,850. Rent debt: 4 months overdue. Family: mother, Martha Walker, weak health, mild heart condition, living in the suburbs. Alexander stopped reading for a moment. $10,000, an amount so small to him he hadn't even counted it, could have solved every problem in this girl's life. Yet she had chosen to give it back, even after he'd told her to keep it. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The wall of steel he had built inside himself, the one carved by years of bitter disappointment, began to crack just slightly. She could have taken everything, but chose nothing. In his world, that kind of person was rarer than a miracle. The next morning, Alexander put on a charcoal gray suit and walked into Moonlight Cafe in broad daylight. No disguises, no shadows, just a powerful man. But this time, his eyes weren't searching for profit. They were searching for something true. Emily was wiping down a table by the window. When she looked up, she froze. "Mr. Grant?" she stammered, barely believing what she was seeing. The cafe stirred with whispers. Who wouldn't recognize that name? Alexander Grant, the young CEO whose face appeared on business magazines, whose expression never softened. He smiled faintly. You can call me Alexander. I owe you a thank you. She shook her head quickly. No, you don't owe me anything. I just did what anyone should do. He studied her for a long moment, then smiled again. I used to think no one in this world did things simply because they were right. Emily blushed, unsure how to respond, lowering her gaze. Alexander took a seat at the same table where he had once sat watching her through the rain. She brought him his coffee, the same warm, bitter aroma as before. Are you still studying? He asked. Yes, I'm in my last semester, but I haven't paid the full tuition yet. I thought so, he said softly, his tone calm but no longer cold. She blinked. You thought so? I have a habit of learning about the people who intrigue me. Emily froze, uncertain whether to feel flattered or alarmed. But there was no arrogance in his gaze, only something unexpectedly sincere. He set his cup down and folded his hands on the table. I'm starting a new community initiative, a fund to support underprivileged students and young startups. I need someone who understands their reality, not just the numbers on a report. I need an intern, someone honest. Emily's eyes widened. An intern? At Grant Corporation? Yes, I don't care if you lack experience. What I need is a genuine heart. She stared at him, stunned, her pulse racing. She had sent dozens of internship applications. None had ever called her back. And now, sitting across from her, the very man everyone admired and feared, was offering her a place in his world. I don't know if I'm qualified, she whispered. Alexander tilted his head slightly, his gaze steady, almost penetrating. You've already proven you possess what my company needs most. What's that? Integrity. A quiet stillness filled the air between them. Emily bit her lip, trying to hold back the tears welling in her eyes. If you trust me, I'll do my best, she said softly. I don't trust people easily, Alexander replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips. But this time, maybe I'll try. When he left the cafe, Emily stood by the door, watching as the sleek black car disappeared into traffic. Her hand rose instinctively to her chest, her heart still pounding. Everything had happened so suddenly, as if life had opened an unexpected door just for her. She didn't yet realize that with those few simple words, I need an intern, her life had just stepped into a new chapter, one where her heart would learn to love, to trust, and to face a world far beyond her own. As for Alexander, driving down the sunlit street, he caught his reflection in the rearview mirror and smiled faintly. For the first time in a long while, he was looking forward to being at the office the next morning. On her first day at Grant Corporation, Emily stood frozen before the towering glass building, its surface gleaming under the morning sun. High above her, silver letters shimmered against the steel. Grant Corporation, building tomorrow. She drew a deep breath. Her freshly pressed white blouse, carefully cleaned pencil skirt, and the black heels borrowed from her roommate made her look professional enough, but her hands still trembled slightly. She could hardly believe it. A week ago, she'd been working the night shift at a cafe, and now she was walking into one of the most prestigious companies in the city as the personal intern to CEO Alexander Grant. The moment she stepped through the revolving doors, the world seemed to shift. The lobby gleamed with light, the scent of oak wood and coffee blending in the air. Men and women in sharp suits moved briskly, their footsteps clicking in a precise rhythm, like the heartbeat of a living clock. A tall woman with sleek blonde hair and a gray suit approached her, voice clipped and polished. You must be Emily Walker, correct? I'm Melissa, Mr. Grant's executive assistant. I'll be showing you around today. Yes, nice to meet you, Emily said, bowing slightly, her polite smile tinged with nervousness. Melissa didn't return the smile. She simply nodded once and turned. Follow me. The elevator shot upwards so quickly that Emily's ears popped. When the doors opened, she stepped into another world, the 42nd floor, where only senior executives worked. Marble floors, frosted glass walls, hushed footsteps. Even the air felt heavier here, pressed under the weight of precision and power. At the end of the hallway stood a black oak door engraved with metallic letters. Alexander Grant. Mr. Grant isn't in yet, Melissa said crisply. You can work at the outer desk. Start by organizing these files for me. Be punctual, dress neatly, and don't ask unnecessary questions. No one here has time for mistakes." Without waiting for an answer, she walked off, leaving Emily facing a tower of files stacked halfway up the desk. Taking a steadying breath, Emily began to sort through them one by one, whispering dates and names under her breath as she worked. No one spoke to her. A few people walked by, glancing at her with faint curiosity, some with polite indifference, others with thinly veiled judgment. "They probably think I don't belong here," she thought, then smiled softly to herself and kept working. By lunchtime, she slipped quietly into the employee cafeteria. She bought the cheapest sandwich on the menu and sat by the window far from the others. Across the room, a group of office workers laughed over coffee. "I heard she used to be a waitress." "Seriously? And now she's working for Mr. Grant? I wonder what he sees in her," one of them murmured with a smirk. Emily heard every word but pretended not to. She just tightened her grip on her cup of water and whispered to herself, "Just focus. You came here to learn, not to be liked." That afternoon, as she passed the technical department, she noticed an elderly janitor struggling to gather a pile of documents that had fallen onto the floor. People walked past without so much as a glance. Emily immediately bent down beside him. "Let me help you with that." "Thank you, dear, but this is the executive wing. You shouldn't—" "It's fine," she said, smiling. She gathered the papers carefully, stacking them neatly in order before handing them back. The man's tired eyes softened with gratitude. What she didn't know was that, through the glass wall of his office, Alexander Grant had been watching. He had just stepped out of a meeting when he saw her, hair tied up, sleeves rolled, blouse slightly wrinkled, helping someone no one else had even noticed. Her quiet kindness, her unguarded smile. It was something utterly foreign in this building of mirrors and masks. For reasons he couldn't explain, his chest felt warmer than it had in a long time. "Melissa," he said softly, still watching her. "That's the new intern, isn't it?" "Yes, sir." "Emily Walker." He nodded slowly. And kept watching. On the third day, Emily was asked to deliver a set of documents to the CEO's office. She knocked gently, and a calm voice replied, "Come in." Stepping inside, she instantly felt the atmosphere shift. The room was serene, the only sound the scratch of a pen across paper. Alexander sat behind his desk, crisp white shirt, sleeves slightly rolled, the light from the tall windows glinting off the silver watch at his wrist. "Set it here." "Thank you," he said without looking up. She placed the folder carefully on the desk, but as she turned to leave, her elbow caught a coffee cup, sending dark liquid spilling across several pages. Her breath caught. Her heart stopped. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I'll clean it right now," she stammered, fumbling for tissues, hands shaking. Alexander looked up, his cool gray eyes meeting hers. For a second, she braced for the explosion. Anger, cold words, humiliation. But it never came. He saw a girl truly panicking, not pretending, not calculating, just afraid of having failed. He stood, took another napkin and handed it to her. His voice was low even. "Just don't repeat it. I don't dislike mistakes. I dislike pretense." Emily froze, eyes wide. He wasn't angry. He hadn't scolded her. There was no trace of the feared Mr. Grant that everyone spoke of. I'm really sorry," she whispered. "It's fine," he said gently, sitting back down. "Make me a new cup of coffee instead. Less sugar this time." "Yes, sir." And for the first time, she felt a touch of warmth inside that cold, glass-walled office. That evening, as Emily left work, she still couldn't shake the image of his gaze. Steady but not harsh, distant yet strangely human. There was something behind the ice, something fragile. She didn't know that after she left, Alexander had paused, looking at the faint coffee stain on the corner of the papers. A quiet chuckle escaped him, a rare sound in that office. "She's better than half the people here," he murmured, closing the file. That weekend, when Emily returned home, her mother asked softly, "How's work, sweetheart? Is it hard working for someone like that?" Emily smiled as she sat beside her mother under the warm glow of the small lamp. "It's hard, Mom, but I think I'm learning something important." Her mother looked at her, curious. And what's that? Emily's eyes softened. That not everyone who seems cold is heartless. Some people just need a little kindness to start believing in the world again. Elsewhere in a high-rise apartment overlooking the city, Alexander stood by the window. Below, the street shimmered like a river of light. In his hand was an old business card, the one she had once used to call him. He smiled faintly. Maybe, he whispered, I'm starting to believe again too. Soul Stories fam, if you're watching on another channel, come home to us at Soul Stories, where tens of thousands of listeners and sharers come together. The workday ended with a thin rain tracing diagonal lines down the glass windows. Emily tidied her desk, checked her inbox one last time, and was just about to shut down her computer when a notification appeared. 7:30 p.m., dinner with Mr. Grant, location attached. Subject, discussion of next quarter's community project. Her breath caught. Melissa had made a passing remark that afternoon. He's busy tonight, but if you get an invite, go. Her tone had been as even as always, but her eyes had flickered with something Emily couldn't quite read. Had she done something wrong or something right? She spent a few minutes in the restroom fixing her hair, buttoning up a cleaner white blouse, and straightening her collar. Facing her reflection, she whispered, "It's just work. Just a business discussion." She repeated it like a mantra until her heartbeat slowed. A message came through on her phone. Étoile, 7:30, corner table. Étoile, a French restaurant known for its quiet elegance. Emily exhaled deeply, grabbed her coat, and left the 42nd floor before her nerves could change her mind. Étoile welcomed her with golden light and the soft scent of butter. It wasn't loud. Everything there seemed to communicate in whispers. Alexander was already seated at a corner table by the window, his back straight, one hand resting lightly on the rim of a glass of water. The lamplight reflected off the silver watch on his wrist, the only object that hinted at luxury. Otherwise, he wore simple confidence. A black shirt, dark trousers, and quiet composure. He stood as soon as he saw her. "Thank you for being on time. Thank you for the invitation, Mr." She hesitated. "Mr. Grant, I'm a little nervous." "Don't be," he said, voice low and calm, like a reassurance rather than an order. "We're just talking business." They ordered dinner. Alexander chose veal stew and a light red wine. Emily scanned the French menu, trying not to look lost, and finally settled on onion soup and salad. When the waiter left, silence filled the space between them. But it wasn't heavy. Somehow it felt peaceful, like the sound of rain brushing softly against the window. "The community project," he began, his eyes resting on her. "I want to expand it. Scholarships, not just one-time grants. Long-term follow-ups, real stories. I need someone who can walk with them, listen, understand. I think you can." "You think I can?" she asked, surprised at the shift in his tone. At work, everyone called him Mr. Grant. But tonight, the distance in his voice had thinned. "I'll do my best," she said softly. "Doing your best isn't always enough," he replied, not harshly but truthfully. "But sometimes doing it with your heart is worth more than any process." She smiled faintly. "I'm not very good with processes, but I'm good at asking the questions people avoid." "Such as, are you pretending to be okay?" she said with a small laugh. "Most people only ask, are you okay?" Alexander's lips curved. Not a full laugh, but enough to ease the edges of his face. The gray in his eyes softened. Their food arrived. Between bites, they spoke about school lists, application forms, and ways to make the scholarship less intimidating. Emily suggested replacing part of the essay with short videos, so applicants could speak for themselves. Alexander listened carefully, occasionally asking short, precise questions and taking notes on his phone. It wasn't like any meeting she'd imagined. No pressure, no cold authority. He listened as if time itself had slowed to make room for their exchange. When the waiter refilled their glasses, Alexander set down his pen. His voice lowered slightly. "Why did you return the wallet?" he asked quietly. "When you were struggling to pay tuition?" Emily set her spoon down, looking at the faint reflection of light on the table. A moment passed. Then she lifted her head. "Because if I lose my honesty," she said simply, "I lose everything." The answer was short, unpolished, and utterly real. It landed between them like a pebble dropped into still water, small but rippling deep. Alexander didn't speak right away. There was a shift in his gaze. Not surprise, not disbelief, but recognition, as if something long buried had stirred. "When I was younger," he said finally, "I thought I could trust family." He paused, his eyes drifting to the wall behind her. "Until one internal deal, my brother tried to transfer assets behind my back. It wasn't just money. It was him saying, 'I'll choose me, not you,' even though we share the same name." Emily didn't interrupt. She only nodded softly, to let him know she was listening, really listening. "After that," he continued, "I started measuring everything by risk. Every smile was a calculation. Every compliment had a price. Every handshake came with fine print. And then a foolish waitress brought your wallet to the 42nd floor," Emily said quietly, half teasing, half earnest, "and ruined your calculations." He looked at her. This time his smile came more easily. "Not foolish, just different." "Do you regret leaving the wallet behind?" she asked. "Yes," he said after a beat, "because it reminded me of what I'd become." "What's that?" "The man who tests the world instead of living in it." A breeze slipped through the cracked window, carrying the scent of rain. Emily leaned her chin on her hand, studying him as if reading a page worth deciphering. "How long have you been in that perfect cage of yours?" "Long enough to forget how to open it." He traced the rim of his glass. "But lately, it feels like someone's holding the key." His eyes flicked toward her. "Maybe." Her face warmed. She took a sip of water, pretending to glance at her notes. "About the application process," she said quickly, "I think we should add informal interviews, walks, or cheap meals. You can see more of who people really are." "Where do you like to observe people?" he asked. "Where they stop pretending." "Bus stops, grocery stores before closing." "And where do you see me?" he asked, tone light but eyes searching. "In a glass office," she replied without hesitation. "But your eyes are always somewhere outside." He was silent for a long time. The quiet stretched until she feared she'd crossed a line. Then he said, "One day, show me this bus stop." "I'll take you to a discount grocery store instead," she laughed. "You'll learn the world really smells like bread there." "Deal," he said, smiling. When dessert arrived, a warm slice of apple tart, she cut it neatly in half and pushed one piece toward him. "Half for work," she said, "half for the man learning how to trust again." He looked at the shared slice, as if it were some kind of gentle ritual. "Do you always divide things like this?" "My mother taught me. She said when there isn't enough, cutting it in half makes it easier to swallow." "How is your mother?" he asked quietly. "Better," Emily said, her face lighting up. "I took her for a checkup." "Honestly," she hesitated, "I almost used the money in your wallet. For about 10 seconds I imagined how many problems it would solve. But then," she shrugged lightly, "I wouldn't have been able to live with myself." Alexander didn't blink. The words went straight through the armor he'd spent years perfecting. This wasn't a confession seeking forgiveness. It was truth, simple and clean. He exhaled softly. "Thank you for not taking it." Then after a pause, more quietly, "And thank you for giving me a reason to start believing." They left when the rain had stopped. The street glistened, puddles reflecting the broken glow of the city lights. At the steps outside, Alexander opened his umbrella. Emily reached for her own cheap one, but he tilted his slightly toward her. "I'll walk you home," he said, not as an order, not even as a question, just an instinct wrapped in courtesy. "You don't have to," she began, then stopped. His expression wasn't stern, just kind. She smiled. "All right." They walked side by side in silence. The world around them was hushed, save for the sound of water underfoot. At one corner the wind shifted, pushing the umbrella more toward her. She noticed his shoulder growing damp, wanted to tell him to move it back, but stayed quiet. Some gestures, she thought, were too tender to interrupt. When they reached the subway entrance, he said, "Send me your full proposal tomorrow. Keep it short, but make it real." He looked at her, the silver in his eyes now holding something warm. "Like you." "I will," she said softly. "And Emily," he called just as she stepped down the first stair. Yes? What you said tonight, it's going to stay with me. If I lose my honesty, I lose everything. Maybe because of that, I've lost a little less. She couldn't find words. She simply smiled and said, "Good night, Alexander." For the first time, he heard his own name in her voice, and it sounded like a lullaby. As the subway doors closed behind her, Alexander stood beneath the quiet sky. In the reflection on the glass, he saw a man who seemed less guarded, less sharp. From that night on, every test he designed of the world of people would no longer begin with suspicion, but with a small space for kindness to prove itself. And somewhere between belief and rediscovery, he realized he had already begun to trust. In something unseen, and somehow, in her. The city seemed to hold its breath before the storm. By late afternoon, the sky had turned the color of bruised steel, clouds dragging their weight across the horizon. The air was heavy with the metallic scent that comes right before thunder breaks. On the 42nd floor, the lights still glowed. Most employees had already gone home after the emergency weather warning, leaving only a few behind to finish urgent work. Emily sat at her desk, eyes fixed on the glowing screen as the wind outside whipped against the windows, making the curtains sway like restless waves. "Still here!" Alexander's voice came from behind, low even, with a hint of fatigue. She startled slightly, turning to see him standing by the window, hands in his pockets, eyes trained on the churning sky. The reflection of the office light caught the sharp lines of his face, composed yet shadowed by the exhaustion of someone who hadn't known peace in years. "I just wanted to finish the scholarship report," she said. "If the power goes out tomorrow, at least it'll be done." "You still don't need to stay here alone," he interrupted, not unkindly. "Just a man too used to giving orders." Emily smiled faintly. "If you're still here, then I'm not exactly alone, am I?" He paused. The words, simple as they were, made him glance at her again. His voice softened. "Careful, Emily. People could misunderstand you when you say things like that." "Could they?" She tilted her head, her eyes bright. "I was just being honest." He exhaled quietly and turned back toward the window. Outside, thunder rolled and lightning slashed the sky open for a brief, blinding second. Emily flinched instinctively, shoulders curling in. Alexander noticed. He crossed the room and asked, his tone low, "You're afraid of storms?" "Just a little," she admitted. "I've been like this since I was a kid. My mom used to say thunderstorms were just God cleaning the house." She tried to laugh, but her hands stayed clenched on the edge of the desk. Another flash. Another crack of thunder, louder this time. She gasped and nearly stood up, hugging her arms tight around herself. Without thinking, Alexander shrugged off his suit jacket and draped it gently over her shoulders. "Sit," he said softly. "It'll pass soon." Warmth seeped into her skin through the fabric, carrying his faint scent of cedar and coffee. Emily lowered her gaze, fingers gripping the lapel. "Thank you." He nodded once, sitting across from her, elbows on the table, eyes still on the storm outside. Silence filled the space, gentle, rhythmic, broken only by the steady drumming of rain on glass. It was the kind of silence that didn't need filling. After a while, she said quietly, "I think maybe you're afraid of storms too." He turned his head. "Me? Yes. Not thunder. The kind of storm you can't control. When someone can hurt you and you can't stop them." He looked at her for a long moment, the quiet between them deepening until it seemed the rain had stopped. Her words had landed somewhere too close to the truth. "Maybe," he said finally, voice rougher now. "I've spent my life trying to control everything. But you're right. Sometimes all it takes is one lightning strike to turn every plan to ash." Emily smiled softly, eyes reflecting the pale flicker of the storm. "But after a storm, trees still grow. The ground's still green again. You don't believe in that?" He studied her. "Do you?" "I can't afford not to." Her tone was quiet but steady. He let out a quiet breath that almost turned into a laugh. For once, it wasn't cold or measured. It was unguarded. "You have a strange talent for making people want to protect you." "Me?" She blinked, surprised. "Yes." His voice lowered. not in command but in warmth. Maybe because you don't know you're doing it. For a while, neither spoke. Outside, the wind roared. Lightning streaked the clouds, and then, as if exhausted, the world began to soften again. Time slipped by. The lights flickered, then went out, leaving only the dim golden glow of the backup generator. The air turned still and intimate, the kind of quiet that felt almost dreamlike. "We might be stuck here until morning," Alexander said after checking his phone. "They've issued a movement restriction." "So, I get to work overtime with the CEO tonight?" Emily teased lightly, and for the first time, he had to smile. "I don't think most people would dare call it overtime when their boss is sitting beside them. I just call it what it is. You once told me honesty can be dangerous." "It's still worth it," she replied without hesitation. He shook his head, amused, quietly defeated by her simplicity. Somehow this woman had the power to make even his most rigid words sound unnecessary. He watched her then, her hair slightly tousled, the faint circles under her eyes betraying fatigue, yet her gaze still bright, alive. She wasn't someone the world had treated gently, and yet she carried a purity that felt almost defiant. A sudden gust pushed at the window, billowing the curtain. Emily flinched again, and his jacket slipped off her shoulders. He reached out instinctively to adjust it. His fingers brushed the curve of her collar, grazing warm skin. Both froze. "Sorry," he said quickly, pulling back. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice nearly lost in the sound of rain. Neither moved after that, but something shifted, quietly, unmistakably. In that faint light, with the wind softening and the storm receding, something unspoken had begun to take root. By dawn, the sky had cleared to a pale gray. Clouds scattered like smoke dissolving, and the city exhaled again. Emily stood by the window, watching the clouds drift away. The smell of coffee filled the room from the machine that had somehow kept running through the night. Alexander stood behind her, silent for a long while before he said simply, "Thank you for staying." She turned, smiling. "It's not like I had much choice." He smiled back a little crookedly. "No, I mean, thank you for staying." She met his gaze then, realizing that something in it had changed. Gone was the guarded, calculating coldness she'd first known. In its place was warmth, subtle, tentative, but real. The storm had passed, but it had left something behind, something neither of them could name yet. It had taken the night's rain and thunder to wash away the distance between them, and as the new light broke through the windows, it felt as if both of them, in their own quiet way, had survived the same storm. Monday morning, the moment Emily set her bag down on her desk, she felt it, the shift in the air, a few glances that lingered too long, a half smile here, a whisper there. People greeted her with voices that hovered between politeness and mockery. She didn't understand at first, not until she overheard two women from finance talking softly near the coffee machine. "I heard Mr. Grant took her out to dinner." "Not surprising. Who else gets that kind of invitation? From cafe waitress to CEO's intern? There's already something off about that." "Well, she knows what she's doing." Quiet voice, big eyes, sweet tone. Men like him always fall for that type. A soft laugh. Then another voice joined in, lower, conspiratorial. "And apparently during the storm, she stayed in the office with him." The spoon slipped from Emily's fingers, clinking against the tray. A sound so small, yet loud enough to echo through her chest. She stood there for a moment, frozen, then turned and walked away without a word. She thought the whispers would die down after a day. They didn't. By midweek, the air on the 42nd floor had turned suffocating. Every time the elevator doors opened, she felt dozens of eyes on her. Every smile she offered met silence. When she entered the secondary meeting room, Melissa, the executive assistant, looked up from her notes and said, with practiced neutrality, "You should know in this company everything Mr. Grant does is observed. My advice? Don't be too familiar, whether intentional or not." I didn't, I don't need to know," Melissa interrupted, tone flat as glass. "But others will." The door closed behind her. Emily stood still, the hum of the air conditioner filling the hollow inside her. It felt as if the floor itself was slipping away beneath her feet. That afternoon, Alexander returned from a board meeting. He sensed it immediately. The strained quiet, the unnatural stillness. Teams hunched over their screens, typing too fast, eyes lowered, his brows furrowed. "Where's Emily?" he asked. No one answered. Melissa stepped forward, placing a file on his desk. She requested to leave early. Reason: health. He looked down. The paper trembled faintly, her handwriting uneven, as if written in haste. At the bottom, a small note: "Thank you for giving me the opportunity." Something twisted inside him. Anger, guilt, and an emptiness that hit too deep. He sat still for a few seconds, jaw tightening, then said coldly, "Melissa, call a meeting, all executive staff, now." 10 minutes later, the boardroom was full. No one knew why they'd been summoned, but tension hung in the air like static before lightning. When Alexander walked in, the murmurs died instantly. He set his phone on the table and let his gaze sweep the room. "I hear," he began, voice calm but cutting, "that we've developed a new hobby here. Gossip." No one dared to move. "I hear you've been talking about my intern, about a dinner, about a storm." His tone deepened, every word deliberate. "What disgusts me isn't the rumor itself. It's that you all believed it. Because she's poor." A few heads dropped. Others looked anywhere but at him. "She's the only person in this building who doesn't need to pretend," he continued, voice tightening. "She doesn't flatter me. She doesn't fake loyalty. She doesn't wear masks just to survive here. Can any of you say the same?" Silence. Only the faint patter of rain on the windows answered him, steady and merciless. "If this is how you treat someone for being decent," Alexander said, each word sharp as glass, "then perhaps we should change our slogan from building tomorrow to destroying dignity." Melissa's eyes lowered. A few department heads looked pale. He finished quietly but firmly, "I don't defend liars, but I will defend what's real, at any cost." Then he turned and left the room, the echo of his footsteps louder than the thunder outside. That evening, long after most had gone home, Emily returned to collect her things. She thought the floor would be empty, but when the elevator doors opened, Alexander was there, standing by the window, the city lights stretching far behind him. She froze. "I just came for my bag," she said softly. "I'll submit my resignation in the morning." He turned, his expression unreadable, voice quiet but firm. "I won't allow it. You can't stop me." "I can." He stepped closer. "If you walk away because of a few lies, then they win. And I don't allow that in my company." She gave a small, trembling laugh. "You don't understand. You can survive gossip. I can't. I've never been anyone, Alexander. I don't want people thinking everything I've achieved came from—" She hesitated, eyes glistening. "You." He studied her, words forming slowly, carefully. Finally, he exhaled. "Then I'm sorry for putting you in that position." "There's nothing to apologize for," she said, voice breaking. "You didn't do anything wrong. I'm not strong enough to face those stares. I'm afraid I'll stop believing in what I used to believe." She turned toward the door, her hand trembling on the handle. "Emily!" His voice stopped her. "I never trusted anyone," he said softly. "Not until I met you. If you leave, I'll have to go back to that world again. Please, don't make me do that." Her breath caught. Tears slipped down her cheeks. "You can't say that just to make me stay." "I'm not saying it to convince you," he said, stepping closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm saying it because it's true." They stood there facing each other in the half-lit room while the rain streaked down the glass, blurring the skyline into soft, trembling light. A single drop fell onto her hand. She couldn't tell if it was rain or tears. She tried to smile, nodding faintly. "I'll think about it." Alexander didn't move, only watched as she walked out. The door closed with a sound too final. He stood there for a long time, the air heavy with the scent of rain. For the first time since he became CEO, Alexander Grant no longer felt above anyone. He just felt small in a world that had finally begun to change because of one woman who dared to stay honest. A month after the storm, the Grant Community Fund was finally nearing its launch. The 42nd floor buzzed with restless energy. Emily practically lived in the office. Days spent processing scholarship applications, nights revising student reports and budget charts. She didn't feel tired. On the contrary, every hour filled her with a quiet, rare joy. Her name appeared now on the internal briefings under program coordinator. Alexander would often stop by her desk, not to talk long, but to leave small, handwritten notes. Cut PR budget by 10%, reallocate to direct scholarships. Send me the final draft by evening. And remember lunch. Those three final words alone were enough to keep her smiling through the afternoon. Between them, there was no definition. Not the CEO and intern, not yet something more. But in the way his gaze softened whenever she laughed, in the quiet restraint that lived in his voice, Emily sometimes dared to believe, just maybe, that he felt it too. The day of the press conference was set. Alexander had called in his closest friend, Daniel Reed, the company's financial consultant, to finalize the sponsorship details. Daniel was a few years older, with the kind of charm and sharp perception that came from reading people for a living. Emily entered the conference room with a stack of reports. She smiled. "I've brought the updated files, Mr. Grant." "Thank you, Emily." Alexander nodded. She placed the folder on the table, bowed slightly and turned to leave. But as the door swung almost shut behind her, Daniel's voice drifted through the narrow gap. "So, you still haven't told her?" "Told her what?" Alexander's tone was flat. "The wallet," Daniel said, a trace of amusement in his voice. "You're really not going to tell her you left it there on purpose? To test her?" There was a brief silence. Then Alexander's reply came, low and tired. "It doesn't matter anymore. The result said enough." Daniel chuckled softly. "That's classic Alexander Grant. Even kindness has to be measured and proven first." Emily froze outside the door. For a moment she thought she'd misheard. Test? Experiment? The words hit her like cold water. So even that night, the night she thought was fate, the moment she'd believed in second chances, was it just part of his experiment? Images crashed back like a wave. The rain-soaked cafe, the way she'd clutched the wallet against her chest before returning it. His quiet words, "You made me believe in people again." His rare, genuine smile when he told her, "You make others want to protect you." Every single one of those memories. Was it all just fallout from a test she never knew she was taking? Her hands trembled as she stepped back from the door. Her chest ached, as if something had splintered inside her. She walked quickly back to her desk, every step sharp, unsteady, like walking over broken glass. Melissa looked up from her screen. "Emily, where are you going? We still need the final—" "I'm done," Emily said quietly. Her voice wavered but didn't break. In her office, she sat down and opened her drawer. She pulled out her employee ID, slid it into a white envelope, and picked up her blue pen. On the front, she wrote only, "Thank you for showing me how beautiful the world can be, even if only for a little while. I thought miracles were real. Turns out, they were just a test." She folded it neatly and placed it on his desk. When she walked past the conference room again, the meeting had ended. Alexander was stepping out, phone in hand, his expression distracted. He caught a glimpse of her leaving, hair loose, shoulders trembling slightly as she moved down the hall. "Emily!" he called. She didn't turn back. An hour later, Alexander returned to his office. The envelope sat waiting for him, centered perfectly on the desk. He opened it. The short note inside hit him harder than any argument ever could. "I thought miracles were real. Turns out they were just a test." He stared at the words until they blurred. Was that how she saw it now? That his silence, his mistake, had reduced everything between them to an experiment? He clenched the paper in his fist. Something raw burned in his chest. When had every choice he made ended up hurting the very people he wanted to protect? He remembered the day he'd left the wallet behind. He'd been so sure the world had lost its honesty. He only wanted to prove himself right, to confirm his cynicism. But Emily had come, and she'd proved him wrong. She'd been the exception, the proof that good still existed. And now, because of his own arrogance, she was gone. He had tested the world for truth and failed his own. That night, the 42nd floor was silent. The white envelope lay open beside a small plastic card, Emily Walker, community fund intern. Alexander sat alone in the half-light, elbows on the desk, face buried in his hands. The city glittered outside as bright as always. But tonight it felt unbearably empty. In the glass reflection he saw himself, the man who had everything, wealth, reputation, control. Everything except the one thing he truly wanted, her trust. His whisper came out rough, almost to himself. I never meant to test you, Emily. I just wanted to see if goodness still existed. But it turns out I'm the one who needed to be tested. The next morning, her office was empty. On her desk lay an old weathered notebook, left open on a half-written page. Sometimes you don't need to be rich to have everything, you just need someone who truly believes in you. Alexander traced his fingers over the ink, his throat tightening. Outside, rain began to fall again. The same quiet rhythm as that night she had returned his wallet. But this time she wasn't coming back. And he knew. To find her again, he would have to do the one thing he had never done in his life. Be completely, painfully honest. The city glowed under a curtain of rain. Long streaks of light stretched along the wet asphalt, bending and breaking through puddles like shards of glass. Inside his car, Alexander Grant drove aimlessly through the downpour. The wipers swept back and forth, but the road ahead remained blurred, not from the weather, but from the hollow ache behind his eyes. On the passenger seat lay the crumpled note, damp at the edges, her handwriting bleeding slightly into the paper. Thank you for showing me how beautiful the world can be, even if only for a short while. He had read it so many times that he no longer needed to look. Every word was etched into him, carving a deeper wound each time he repeated it in silence. She was gone. And for the first time in his life, the man who could make entire departments move with a single order, Alexander Grant felt utterly powerless. He didn't go home that night. The penthouse on Hudson with its glass walls and city view suddenly felt like a mausoleum. Too empty, too clean, too cold. Instead, he drove through narrow streets lined with old brick buildings, where yellow streetlights flickered through mist, where people still hurried under umbrellas and held each other close. Ordinary lives, the kind he'd spent years overlooking, now looked achingly real. He stopped in front of Moonlight Cafe, the place where it all began. Inside, the soft clatter of dishes and the hum of an old radio filled the room. A new waitress worked behind the counter. Not Emily. "Excuse me," he said quietly, his voice rough. "The girl who used to work here on the night shift. Emily Walker. Is she still here?" The waitress shook her head. "No, sir. She quit a few weeks ago. I think she moved out to take care of her mom." "Do you know where she went?" "Not really." The girl hesitated, then added, "But she used to come by the city library in the mornings. Said she liked reading there when the world was quiet." Alexander nodded his thanks and left. The central library was nearly empty when he arrived. The air smelled faintly of old paper and rain-soaked coats. He walked through rows of tall wooden shelves, the echo of his footsteps following him like a question. Every girl with brown hair made his pulse quicken, only to fall when she looked up. Not her. Never her. An elderly librarian approached, voice soft and patient. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'm looking for someone," Alexander said. "Emily Walker. She used to come here often." The man frowned thoughtfully. "Ah, the young woman with the notebook? She hasn't been by in a few days. Last time I saw her, she asked for directions to a cheap boarding house near St. Mary's Hospital." Alexander's breath caught. "Thank you." And he was gone before the man could say another word. The road to St. Mary's led him away from downtown, past warehouses, rusted fences, and narrow lanes still flooded from the afternoon storm. The air smelled of wet cement and fading hope. He stopped before a small, run-down boarding house, its peeling walls and flickering hallway light a world away from the gleaming tower he called his own. Room number 8. The landlord, a man with kind eyes and weathered hands, nodded when Alexander showed Emily's name. "She stayed here for a bit. Quiet girl, always paid on time, even when she looked like she hadn't eaten much. Left yesterday, said she was going back home to take care of her mother." Alexander's chest tightened. "Do you know where that is?" The man shook his head. "Didn't say. But She left this. From the drawer, he pulled a folded note. The paper creased, edges soft with damp. Alexander unfolded it carefully. If anyone comes looking for me, tell them I'm fine. And please, tell them not to look anymore. He stood there under the dripping awning, rain pelting his shoulders, soaking through his coat. The ink had begun to run, blurring into small gray rivers, but the words were still legible enough to break his heart. He sat in his car for a long time afterward, engine off, windows fogging. The city, for once, seemed still. Even the storm had gone quiet, leaving behind a muffled calm, as if the world itself was holding its breath with him. He reached for his wallet, the same one that had started everything. Inside, the business cards were gone, but one small thing remained, a coin wedged at the corner of an old photograph. The coin Emily had used that night to keep the picture from sliding out. He held it between his fingers, feeling the cold metal against his skin, and laughed, a short, broken sound that dissolved into silence. "A test," he murmured, "and I'm the one who failed." The words trembled out of him like a confession. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against the steering wheel. For years he had thought power meant control, over people, over chaos, over truth. But now, sitting alone in the quiet hum of the rain, he finally understood what it meant to lose something real. For the first time, Alexander wasn't afraid of failure or scandal. He was afraid of never finding her again. The one person who had looked at him and seen a man, not a title. The one person who had made him believe, even for a heartbeat, that kindness was still possible. And as the night stretched on, with the rain whispering against glass, Alexander whispered to no one, "For the first time, I just want someone to believe me. Not because I'm Alexander Grant, but because I mean it." And the city, vast and glimmering, offered no answer. Only the echo of her absence and the sound of the rain marking the road he would have to take to find her again. Autumn mornings in the suburbs always carried a special kind of light, soft, golden, and forgiving. The kind that could make even old pain seem gentle. Emily poured tea for her mother, watching the steam curl up in the quiet kitchen. The old radio on the counter hummed with static before the announcer's voice broke through, calm, professional, and clear. The Grant Youth Program, a new scholarship initiative for underprivileged students, will launch this Saturday at Riverside Hall. CEO Alexander Grant will deliver the opening address. The name made her hand freeze midair. She pretended to focus on pouring the tea, but her heart had already tripped over itself. Her mother looked up from the table, eyes kind and knowing. "That's the man you used to work for, isn't he?" Emily forced a small smile. "Just a coincidence, I guess." But when she stepped outside that afternoon to collect the mail, there was an envelope waiting. Plain white, no return address. Inside lay a formal invitation, embossed in silver. "You are cordially invited to the opening ceremony of the Grant Youth Program, for those who still believe in goodness." And below, a single handwritten line in blue ink, "Hope you still believe." A G. She stood under the porch, wind brushing through her hair, the words glowing softly in her hands. Her heart clenched, not with anger, but with something deeper, something she had tried not to name. He remembered. Yet her mind whispered caution. Going would mean reopening a wound that had just begun to heal. Her mother's hand came to rest gently on her shoulder. "Maybe you should go, sweetheart. Some things you have to hear with your own heart before you can let them go." Emily nodded. Her eyes glimmered, caught between fear and forgiveness. Riverside Hall gleamed the next morning, a sea of polished marble, camera flashes, and floral arrangements. The launch of the Grant Youth Program was nothing short of grand, the kind of perfection that had always surrounded Alexander Grant. Emily slipped quietly into the last row, keeping her head down, blending into the crowd. On stage, Alexander stood at the podium. He looked the same, poised, immaculate, yet something about him was changed. His shoulders no longer carried that rigid air of control. His eyes, once sharp and distant, held a kind of quiet sincerity that hadn't been there before. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice steady, rich and calm. "We often think great projects are born from strategy and vision, but for me, this one was born from a lesson." A few murmurs stirred in the audience. Emily's breath caught. A lesson, he continued, about honesty, and about how sometimes the most valuable thing in this world isn't found in our ledgers, but in a small act of goodness, like returning a wallet. A soft ripple went through the room. Cameras clicked faintly. Emily's fingers tightened around her seat. Months ago, Alexander said, pausing for a breath, I met a young woman who had nothing but her integrity and a belief that the world could still be kind. She reminded me that goodness exists, even when we stop looking for it. She taught me to believe again. And then, his gaze lifted, straight toward the back row. To her, their eyes met across the distance, and in that instant, the noise of the room faded away. This program, he said slowly, voice lowering as if speaking only to her, was built because of that lesson, and because of the person who taught it to me. The silence that followed was almost sacred. Emily sat frozen, her heart a storm. Then Alexander did something no one expected. He set down the microphone and stepped off the stage. Every head in the room turned as he walked, calm, certain, down the aisle. The whispers fell away, replaced by a reverent hush. When he reached the final row, he stopped in front of her. Under the soft glow of the lights, he looked down, not like a CEO addressing a subordinate, but like a man facing the only truth that mattered. In his hands was a small bouquet, white daisies mixed with a few sprigs of baby's breath. Simple, unpretentious, beautiful. You once gave me faith, he said softly, his voice trembling just enough to be human. And today I wanted to show you. I turned that faith into something real. Her eyes welled up. You didn't have to do all this for me. He shook his head, smiling faintly. Not for you. For me. Because I never want to live behind another test again. I just want to believe. Honestly. The daisies trembled slightly between them. Emily stood. Her hands reached out hesitantly to take them. A tear slipped down her cheek. Warm, clean, and bright like sunlight through glass. Then the applause began. Hesitant at first, then rising into a wave. And in the middle of it, under the lights and the soft fall of petals, stood a man who had built his world on doubt, and the woman who had taught him how to trust it again. After the ceremony, when the crowd had dispersed, they found themselves alone on the steps outside. The late sunlight draped everything in gold. The air smelled faintly of flowers and rain. I didn't think you'd find me, Emily said quietly. I didn't, he admitted. You found me, through the faith you left behind. She smiled, small and genuine. That faith, it broke for a while. Then let me be the one to mend it, he said. They stood there in the gentle stillness. A breeze rustled through the bouquet in her hands, sending a few petals floating away. I kept the wallet, he said at last, voice soft. It reminds me of what I almost lost, and what I'll never take for granted again. She tilted her head. And what's the lesson? He chuckled, the sound light for the first time in months. Never underestimate a girl who can turn your whole world upside down, just by being honest. Emily laughed through her tears. The sound was like a song, clear, free, and impossibly alive. Somewhere nearby, a photographer caught the moment. The man with gray eyes, the woman with daisies, both standing in sunlight and smiling at each other. The photo would later hang in the main lobby of the Grant Youth Program. Beneath it, a small inscription would read, Faith, the one thing money can't buy, yet it can change everything. That morning, the sky was so clear, it was hard to believe it had ever known a storm. Sunlight spilled between the glass towers, brushing gold across the narrow street where Moonlight Cafe still sat humbly between taller buildings. Emily walked slowly toward it, her heart beating to an old familiar rhythm. The text from Alexander the night before had been simple. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. at the old cafe. I want to return something. She had read it over and over, wondering what something meant. Yet her heart had already known it would matter. When she pushed open the door, the little bell above chimed softly. The same sound that had once started everything between them. He was already there, seated by the window where she used to wipe the polished wooden table each night. Morning light touched his face, and for once he didn't look like the commanding CEO the world feared. He looked simply like a man who had learned how to love, honestly, quietly and without armor. On the table lay a familiar black leather wallet. That wallet, the one that had begun it all. When she approached, he smiled and gently slid it toward her. "I want you to open it." She hesitated, then obeyed. Inside there was no cash, no business cards, only a small photograph, taken at the launch of the Grant Youth Program. In it, she stood holding a bouquet of white daisies, and beside her, Alexander watched her with an expression that could only be described as pride softened by love. Emily looked up, smiling through a small, shaky breath. "You've forgotten your wallet again?" His gray eyes glimmered with the faintest mischief. "If you find it this time, I hope you won't give it back." Before she could answer, he stood, walked around the table, and, to her disbelief, knelt down in front of her. The cafe went utterly still. From his pocket, he took out a small velvet box and opened it. Inside, a silver ring caught the light, a single diamond, modest and clear as a drop of morning dew. His voice trembled, deep and quiet, every word pulled straight from his chest. "The day you returned this wallet," he said, "I thought I was testing someone else's integrity, but it was you who tested mine. You made me realize that kindness doesn't need proof, and love doesn't need conditions." He lifted his gaze, and in his eyes she saw both apology and devotion. "So today, I don't want you to give anything back. I just want for you to keep me, if you can." Her hand flew to her mouth. Tears broke free, falling onto his fingers. "You're insane," she whispered, laughing through the tears. "I don't need your wallet. I don't need your money." "I know," he said softly, smiling up at her. "But I hope you'll keep this." He took her hand, slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting there all along. "Because," she breathed, smiling through her tears, "I've already kept the man who owned it." Applause echoed from the corner. The older waitress, the one who had worked beside Emily years ago, stood by the counter, clapping slowly, eyes shining. "First proposal we've ever had in this place," she said with a watery smile. "Maybe this cafe brings people luck," Emily replied, glancing around. Alexander squeezed her hand gently, and they sat together at the old table. Outside, the world hurried on, but inside, time seemed to pause, suspended in the stillness of something finally made right. "I used to think," he said quietly, "that the world existed only in numbers and contracts. Then you came along, and every theory I had unraveled. And I used to think you'd never change," she teased, wiping a tear away. "I didn't, until I realized what it meant to lose you." They both laughed softly, their smiles tinted with tears. For a long moment, neither spoke. They didn't need to. A month later, the newspapers ran the headline, "Grant Corporation expands nationwide scholarship program for underprivileged youth." In the accompanying photo, Alexander and Emily stood side by side. She was no longer listed as an intern, but as program director, the woman who helped shape the foundation's heart. At the press conference, Alexander gave a brief address. His voice carried the quiet authority of a man who had finally learned humility. "This world can be ruthless," or he said, "but as long as one person chooses honesty, there's still hope. Our goal is to turn that hope into something lasting." When he finished, he turned toward her and reached for her hand. She smiled, radiant beneath the lights. The same smile that had once reminded him that goodness was the truest language people could share. That afternoon, after the cameras stopped flashing and the guests had gone, they stepped out onto the balcony overlooking the city. The breeze carried the scent of flowers from the hall below. Emily leaned on the railing, looking at the skyline. "Funny," she murmured. "All this started because of a lost wallet." Alexander smiled, sliding an arm gently around her shoulders. "No," he said. "It started because of a found heart." She turned to him, laughter bright in her eyes. "That's terribly cheesy." "Maybe," he admitted, grinning, "but I finally understand why people say love makes you foolish." "Then it's working." He chuckled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Promise me one thing," he said softly. "What's that?" "Whatever happens, never stop believing in people, not even in me." She looked up at him, eyes shining. "Only if you promise to never test anyone again." "Deal!" Their laughter mingled with the wind as the city glowed beneath them. vast, alive, and forgiving. And somewhere, far below, Moonlight Cafe still stood quietly, its little bell chiming every time someone opened the door. Because sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or fate. Sometimes they begin with a lost wallet and end with a promise kept forever.